What's up, guys? Today I'm here to talk about the last Dean Koontz novel I will probably ever read. So, I started reading this one, TikTok, and it was the first Dean Koontz novel that I did not finish reading. I got about 60 or 70 pages into it, and I just decided to stop reading it because the story just did not interest me at all. I was just very bored during this entire time reading it. The chapters in this book are very long. Even though I was 60 or 70 pages into it, I was still only on the second chapter. There really wasn't a whole lot going on. There was just a ton of explanation and just a bunch of stuff that was super boring to me. And I could not get into it at all. So I just decided to put it down. And probably also the reason I decided that is I'm just kind of sick of his work in general. So even though I did find this book a little bit boring and uninteresting, just in general, I'm just kind of sick of reading his books. Um, the first Dean Koontz book I ever read was Twilight Eyes. I read it, I want to say a few years ago, and I really fell in love with it. Absolutely adored that book. Really kind of got me back into reading again because at the time I wasn't reading a whole lot. And after falling in love with that book, I wanted to check out more of his work naturally. So I got a bunch of used books of his from the library and from like a used bookstore and just started going through and reading a bunch of his novels. And after reading many of them, I started to notice that he reuses a lot of the same plot points and tropes, and he's a very repetitive writer. If you've read a few of his books, you've read pretty much all of them. They start to become predictable and stale after a while. And he also has a tendency to start books really strongly, with the exception of this one. This one I was not feeling at all, which is why I decided to quit it. But a lot of his books, he has the tendency to start really strong. He jumps right into the action. He's really good at writing suspense, as I've mentioned before. I really love reading when he's writing in like high tension situations and there's some creepy stuff going on and lots of action. He does that kind of stuff very well. And then his books just kind of take a nosedive. Like halfway through, he completely kills that pace that was going on early in the book. He kills all the suspense. He gives us some really weird explanations. And then he just comes up with these really goofy endings a lot of the times that ruins the book, honestly. So I've had a lot of bad experiences reading Koontz that have kind of ruined it for me a little bit. I just don't enjoy reading his books as much anymore. And that's probably why this will be the last book I read from him, at least for a long time yet. So in the future, if he comes out with a book that sounds really interesting and maybe I'm getting the craving to read one of his books again, it's been a while, maybe I'll check it out. We'll see. But apart from the few Dean Koontz books that I've decided to keep in my collection, which are my favorite ones, I'm probably won't be reading any more of his books anytime soon. I just decided to stop reading them. I get sick of reading the same darn book over and over again, and that's kind of what it's like with Koontz. They just become predictable after a while, and he has some really good and creative ideas. Like I said, a lot of his books, he starts out very strongly. He introduces some really unique ideas that kind of get you thinking and wondering what's going on. But he just has a really bad habit of tying those ideas together in a really weird way that doesn't make sense. And a lot of his books are just very poorly executed. I feel like a lot of his books are missed opportunities. They have a lot going for them, and then by the end, you're just really let down and disappointed. At least that's been my experience with Dean Koontz for the most part. Out of the 20 plus books that I've read of his, or about 20, maybe slightly over 20, I don't remember for sure, but around the 20 books I've read from him, I would say over half have been like that, where they start out really good. I liked some parts of the book, but ultimately I was just really let down by it. But yeah, I decided to make this video just to explain a little bit about how I started out as kind of a Dean Koontz fan after reading Twilight Eyes, and then after discovering more of his work and reading through his books that he's really not he is a really good writer, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to trash Dean Koontz or anything. I have a lot of respect for him. Some of his work is very inspiring to me. He's obviously very successful, but I'm not really a huge Dean Koontz fan anymore after reading so many of his books and seeing that he just kind of does the same thing over and over again. And yeah, So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. And I also want to mention that I plan on doing a top 5 Dean Koontz video. So sometime soon here, I don't know when for sure, maybe later this week or next week, I plan on doing a video where I will talk about my top 5 favorite Dean Koontz novels, which also happen to be the only Dean Koontz novels I still have in my collection, and ones that I will continue to revisit and reread in the future. Like I said, most other Dean Koontz books have really let me down. While most of them aren't terrible or anything like that, they're still not the greatest, and they pale in comparison to these other Dean Koontz novels I'll be talking about in this future video. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that and talk a little bit about Dean Koontz, what was once one of my favorite authors, and I still really appreciate a lot of the work he's done and have respect for him, but I'm just getting sick of reading him. I can't keep reading his books anymore, guys. I've read about 20 of his novels, and I'm calling it quits for now. I'm about to move on to other stuff. I've been reading his books a lot over the last few years since I first read Twilight Eyes, and I'm done reading his books. So yeah. I was going to say a couple other things too, but I'm forgetting what they are. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is even though most of his books are kind of disappointing and not exactly terrible, I'd say they fall around like 2 to 3 out of 5 star ratings for me. There are a few books that are really bad by him. Ones that I would not recommend at all. So if you are kind of looking into getting into reading Dean Koontz, a few books that I would recommend staying away from are Strangers is one of them. And Strangers is kind of a weird book because it was his first hardcover bestseller, I believe. I know it was a little bit more of a popular one. I know it was a bestseller. I can't remember if it was paperback or hardback. I think it was a hardcover bestseller. And that book is one of his longer books. I think it's around 700 pages. And I was super excited to read that one when I read it last year or the year before. I can't remember. I think it was early last year sometime I read that. And I was so let down by that book. Strangers is not a good Dean Koontz book, in my opinion anyway. I know was a bestseller and it's probably popular among some of the fans, but for me it did not work at all. That 700 pages really dragged on. There's so much unnecessary detail in that book, super repetitive. To me, that book represented more of Koontz's bad traits than it did the good elements of his writing. So if you are wanting to check out Koontz, I would recommend staying away from Strangers. That's just my opinion. Another one of his books that I did not like at all was The House of Thunder. So The House of Thunder, like some of the others, it kind of started out interesting. There was some creepy moments in it. There was a couple parts in that book that actually really creeped me out. Like there was some creepy stuff in there, but it just started dragging on. The book just got really repetitive. A lot of the same stuff kept happening over and over again. And then there was this twist ending that did not work at all for me. It completely ruined the book, even though I was already starting to not enjoy it as much. So The House of Thunder, I would not recommend reading that one either. And according to some other reviews I've seen on The House of Thunder, it seems like that's also one of his less popular books. And yeah, I would recommend staying away from The House of Thunder as well. Not a good Dean Koontz book. And the last book I want to mention by him, that's probably my least favorite of his that I've read so far, is The Mask. That book is awful. So that's one of his earlier novels. I believe it was written in I can't remember if the 70s or the 80s, around there. I think it was like early 80s maybe. Late 70s, early 80s. And that's one of his shorter novels. I believe it was only a couple hundred pages, between 200 and 300 pages maybe. And that one is a straight horror novel. He doesn't write a lot of straight horror. He usually blends genres. He writes a lot of like suspense mixed with sci-fi and adventure, and that's what he's known for, is blending genres a lot. But The Mask was more of a straight horror novel, and that book read like a really cheesy horror movie, super low budget. That's what it reminded me of when I was reading it. It was just super cheesy, and it wasn't horrible. I was able to keep reading it at least, and I kind of wanted to know what was going to happen, even though it was a little bit predictable in some areas. But yeah, by the time I got to the end of The Mask, the ending of that book is the worst ending of any Dean Koontz book I've ever read. And the funny thing about The Mask's ending is it's not even really an ending. I don't know if it's appropriate to call it an ending. The book literally just stops. Like in the middle of the action and stuff that's going on. It's almost like Koontz just stopped writing. Like he was on a deadline with that book or something and ran out of time and didn't have the time to come up with a proper ending to the book, so he just stopped writing. And that's literally what the ending to that book feels like, is he just cut it off. It's like, where's the rest of the book? What happened? Like, what? Like, it was horrible. When I got to that end of that Mask, I was just so confused. I didn't understand what had happened there. I don't know. So that's probably my least favorite Dean Koontz book that I read, probably for that reason alone, to be honest. Even though the rest of the book was really cheesy and not very good also. So yeah, if you do want to check out Dean Koontz, don't read Strangers, The Mask, or The House of Thunder. Stay away from those ones. Those are my least favorite of his I've read so far. A lot of the other ones, like I said, they're decent, but they're okay, but they're not great. And like I said too, I will be doing a video soon with my top 5 Dean Koontz novels, and those are the only Dean Koontz books that I'll ever reread, because even though he has a lot of really mediocre stuff, and those books that he wrote are amazing. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'm done rambling and ranting about this author that used to be my favorite at one point, and I've kind of gotten sick of his work over time. So yeah, guys,